The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow on the bedroom walls. I stirred awake, my mind still hazy from the remnants of an unsettling dream. Beside me, Edward's side of the bed was empty, the sheets cold and undisturbed. A pang of disappointment tugged at my heart, but I brushed it aside, convincing myself that he must have left early for work again. As I made my way downstairs, the sound of muffled sobs drifted from the living room. My heart sank as I found Nora curled up on the couch, her face streaked with tears. "Nora, sweetheart, what's wrong?" I rushed to her side, enveloping her in a tight embrace. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and haunted. "Mom, I saw Dad with another woman. They were holding hands." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. I froze, my mind reeling, unable to process the implications of her statement. "Are you sure, honey? Maybe it was just a misunderstanding," I heard myself say, grasping at straws, desperate to maintain the illusion of the perfect family I had worked so hard to cultivate. Nora shook her head vehemently. "I know what I saw, Mom. It was during the school trip to the city. They were walking together, all cozy and intimate." A lump formed in my throat as the reality of Edward's betrayal sank in. How could he do this to us? After all these years of building a life together, of sacrificing and compromising, he had thrown it all away for a fleeting affair. Anger and hurt swirled within me, threatening to consume me whole. But I couldn't afford to crumble, not with Nora's fragile emotional state hanging in the balance. "We'll get through this, sweetheart," I said, mustering every ounce of strength I could find. "Your father and I will have a long talk, and we'll figure out what's best for our family." Nora nodded, her eyes brimming with a mixture of hope and trepidation. I held her close, stroking her hair, silently vowing to protect her from the fallout of Edward's actions, no matter the cost. The rest of the day passed in a blur, my mind consumed by a whirlwind of emotions. When Edward finally returned home that evening, his demeanor was distant and detached, as it had been for months. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "About what?" "Don't play dumb with me, Edward. Nora saw you with another woman." His eyes widened momentarily before he regained his composure. "It's not what you think, Mara. It was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I scoffed, my anger bubbling to the surface. "How can holding hands with another woman be a misunderstanding?" Edward sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, things have been difficult between us lately. I've been feeling neglected and alone." "And that justifies betraying our family?" I shot back, my voice rising. "We've been through so much together, Edward. How could you throw it all away like this?" He remained silent, his gaze averted, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes. In that moment, I realized that the man standing before me was a stranger, a shadow of the person I had once loved and trusted. The foundation of our marriage had crumbled, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be rebuilt. With a heavy heart, I turned away, retreating to the sanctuary of my bedroom. As I lay awake that night, the weight of Edward's betrayal pressed down on me, suffocating me with its enormity. But amidst the pain and heartbreak, a flicker of determination ignited within me. I would not let this break me. I would not let Edward's actions define our family's future. Come what may, I would fight for Nora, for our happiness, and for the life we deserved. In the days that followed, the tension in our household was palpable, a suffocating blanket of unspoken accusations and resentment. Edward retreated further into his shell, coming home late and leaving early, his excuses growing flimsier by the day. "Where were you last night?" I demanded one evening, my patience wearing thin. "Nora and I waited for hours for you to come home for dinner." Edward's gaze remained fixed on the television, his expression impassive. "I had a late meeting at the office. You know how it is." "Do I?" I challenged, my voice rising. "Because it seems like you're never here anymore. You're always working late or out with clients." He finally turned to face me, his eyes narrowed. "What are you implying, Mara?" "I'm not implying anything," I shot back. "I'm stating facts. You're never around, Edward. You've become a stranger in our own home." His jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of remorse in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a familiar wall of indifference. "I'm doing the best I can," he muttered, turning away from me once again. I wanted to scream, to shake him until he understood the pain he was causing us. But instead, I swallowed the lump in my throat and retreated to the kitchen, my hands trembling with frustration. Nora found me there a few minutes later, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Mom, why does Dad hate us so much?" Her words pierced my heart like a dagger, and I pulled her into a fierce embrace, stroking her hair as she sobbed into my shoulder. "He doesn't hate us, sweetheart," I lied, my own tears mingling with hers. "He's just going through something right now." But even as the words left my lips, I knew they rang hollow. Edward's actions spoke louder than any excuse I could offer. He had abandoned us, emotionally and physically, and I wasn't sure if he would ever find his way back. In the weeks that followed, Edward's behavior only grew more erratic. He would disappear for days at a time, leaving Nora and me to fend for ourselves. When he did return, he was distant and irritable, snapping at us for the slightest perceived transgression. "This can't go on," I told him one night, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "How could you ignore us for so long? We're hurting, Edward." He met my gaze, his eyes cold and unreadable. "I've been under a lot of stress at work," he said flatly. "You wouldn't understand." "Wouldn't understand," I echoed, incredulous. "I've been holding this family together while you've been off gallivanting God knows where. How dare you act like you're the only one struggling?" Edward's jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might lash out at me. But instead, he simply turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and despair. It was in that moment that I realized our marriage was well beyond repair. The man I had loved, the one who had once been my partner and best friend, was gone, replaced by a stranger whose actions were tearing our family apart at the seams. As I lay awake that night, my mind raced with possibilities, desperate for a solution that could salvage what was left of our fractured lives. And then a glimmer of hope flickered to life, a plan slowly taking shape in my mind. If Edward wouldn't fight for our family, then I would have to do it for him. I would expose his lies and infidelity, no matter the cost. And if he still refused to change his ways, then I would have no choice but to walk away, taking Nora with me and leaving him to face the consequences of his actions alone. It wasn't the future I had envisioned for us, but it was the only path forward I could see. And as painful as it would be, I knew in my heart that it was the right thing to do, not just for me, but for Nora and the family we had once cherished. A few days later, Edward approached me with an unexpected proposition. "Let me make it up to Nora," he said, his voice uncharacteristically contrite. "I'll take her on a trip, just the two of us. It'll be a chance for us to reconnect." I eyed him skeptically, my heart torn between hope and trepidation. A part of me longed for the chance to repair the fractured bond between father and daughter, to see Nora's eyes light up with joy once more. But another part of me, the part that had witnessed Edward's lies and betrayal firsthand, couldn't help but question his motives. "And what about us?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "What about our marriage, Edward? A trip with Nora won't fix everything." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "One step at a time, Mara. Let me start by making things right with Nora, and then we can work on the rest." His words rang hollow, but I found myself nodding nonetheless. Perhaps this was the olive branch I had been waiting for, the first step towards reconciliation and healing. When I shared the news with Nora, her reaction was a mixture of cautious optimism and lingering hurt. "Do you really think he means it this time?" she asked, her eyes searching mine for reassurance. "I hope so, sweetheart," I replied, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "Your father loves you, even if he has a hard time showing it sometimes." The days leading up to the trip were filled with a tentative sense of anticipation. Edward seemed more present, more engaged with our family life, and I allowed myself to indulge in the faint hope that perhaps this was the turning point we had been waiting for. The morning of their departure, I watched as Edward and Nora loaded their bags into the car, a bittersweet pang tugging at my heart. "Have a wonderful time, you two," I said, forcing a smile. "And Edward, please, don't let her down again." He met my gaze, his expression unreadable. "I won't," he promised, his voice devoid of emotion. As they drove away, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. But I pushed those doubts aside, clinging to the belief that Edward was finally taking steps to mend the broken bonds within our family. The days crawled by, each one marked by a growing sense of unease. Nora's texts and calls were sporadic, and when they did come, they were brief and lacking in detail. I tried not to read too much into it, but the knot of worry in my stomach tightened with every passing hour. Then one night my phone rang and Nora's frantic voice filled my ear. "Mom, Dad never came to pick me up. He left me waiting all night at the bus station." My heart plummeted as the full weight of Edward's betrayal crashed over me like a tidal wave. I rushed to the station, my mind racing with 1,000 different scenarios, each one more horrifying than the last. When I finally found Nora, huddled in a corner, her eyes red-rimmed and her face streaked with tears, something inside me shattered. She flung herself into my arms, her body racked with sobs, and in that moment, I knew that Edward had crossed a line from which there was no return. As I held my daughter close, whispering soothing words and stroking her hair, a cold fury began to take root within me. Edward had not only broken his promise to Nora, but he had shattered the last remnants of trust and respect I had for him. No more excuses, no more false promises. It was time for Edward to face the consequences of his actions, no matter the cost. I would expose his lies and infidelity, laying bare the truth for all to see. And if he still refused to change his ways, then I would have no choice but to walk away, taking Nora with me and leaving him to face the consequences of his actions alone. It wasn't the future I had envisioned for our family, but it was the only path forward I could see. And as painful as it would be, I knew in my heart that it was the right thing to do, not just for me, but for Nora and the family we had once cherished. The hours ticked by agonizingly slow as I waited for Edward and Nora to return from their trip. My mind raced with 1,000 different scenarios, each one more unsettling than the last. Had something happened to them? Had Edward's mistress wormed her way into their bonding time? When the phone finally rang, my heart leapt into my throat, only to plummet moments later as Nora's trembling voice filled my ear. "Mom, Dad never came to pick me up. He left me waiting all night at the bus station." A wave of nausea washed over me as the full weight of Edward's betrayal crashed down upon me. I rushed to the station, my mind a whirlwind of fear and anger, desperate to find my daughter safe and sound. The sight that greeted me when I arrived will be forever seared into my memory. Nora was huddled in a corner, her eyes red-rimmed and her face streaked with tears. She flung herself into my arms, her body racked with sobs, and in that moment, I knew that Edward had crossed a line from which there was no return. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here," I murmured, stroking her hair and holding her close. "You're safe now." But even as the words left my lips, I knew they rang hollow. How could she ever feel truly safe again when the man who was supposed to protect her had so callously abandoned her? As we made our way home, Nora's voice trembled with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. "Why would he do this, Mom? What did I do wrong?" My heart shattered at the pain lacing her words, and I fought back tears of my own. "You did nothing wrong, honey. This is all on your father." The anger that had been simmering within me erupted into a raging inferno, consuming every other emotion in its path. Edward had not only broken his promise to Nora, but he had shattered the last remnants of trust and respect I had for him. No more excuses, no more false promises. It was time for Edward to face the consequences of his actions, no matter the cost. I would expose his lies and infidelity, laying bare the truth for all to see. And if he still refused to change his ways, then I would have no choice but to walk away, taking Nora with me and leaving him to face the consequences of his actions alone. The following days passed in a blur of fury and determination. I reached out to my parents, Joan and Henry, seeking their support and guidance. Their reactions were a mixture of shock and righteous indignation, but they rallied around Nora and me without hesitation. "You can always come home, sweetheart," my mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "We'll protect you and Nora, no matter what." Emboldened by their unwavering support, I took the next step and reached out to Edward's estranged brother, Brad. Despite his loyalty to their overbearing mother, Vivian, I knew that deep down, he still harbored a sense of familial duty. "Edward has gone too far this time," I told him, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. He abandoned Nora, left her alone and terrified. You think you can just waltz out on our family? There will be consequences. To my surprise, Brad didn't hesitate. I'm with you, Mara. Edward has disgraced our family, and it's time he faced the consequences of his actions. With a newfound sense of determination, I began to lay the groundwork for my plan. Edward's lies and infidelity would be exposed, his carefully constructed facade shattered beyond repair. And if he still refused to change his ways, then I would have no choice but to walk away, taking Nora with me and leaving him to face the consequences of his actions alone. It wasn't the future I had envisioned for our family, but it was the only path forward I could see. And as painful as it would be, I knew in my heart that it was the right thing to do. Not just for me, but for Nora and the family we had once cherished. With my parents' unwavering support and Brad's unexpected alliance, I felt a newfound sense of determination coursing through my veins. Edward's lies and infidelity would be exposed, his carefully constructed facade shattered beyond repair, and if he still refused to change his ways, then I would have no choice but to walk away, taking Nora with me and leaving him to face the consequences of his actions alone. The first step was to gather as much evidence as possible. I scoured through our financial records, uncovering a trail of suspicious charges and withdrawals that hinted at Edward's double life. I also reached out to his colleagues and acquaintances, carefully piecing together the puzzle of his betrayal. As the truth began to unfold, a sickening sense of dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Edward's affair was not a fleeting indiscretion, but rather a calculated web of deceit that had been unraveling for months, perhaps even years. He's been living a lie, Mara, Brad confided in me, his expression grave, and he's dragged all of us into it. I nodded, my jaw clenched with determination. Well, it's time we brought that lie crashing down around him. With Brad's help, I orchestrated a plan to confront Edward in a way that would leave him no room for denial or excuses. We would corner him at his office, exposing his infidelity in front of his colleagues and clients, stripping away the veneer of respectability he had so carefully cultivated. As the day of the confrontation approached, I found myself wavering between a sense of righteous fury and a lingering hope that Edward might see reason and choose to make amends. But deep down, I knew that the man I had once loved was gone, replaced by a stranger whose selfish actions had torn our family apart. The morning of the confrontation dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm that was brewing within me. As I stepped into Edward's office, flanked by Brad and my parents, I could feel the weight of their support like a suit of armor, fortifying me against the onslaught to come. Edward's expression shifted from surprise to defiance as he took in the scene before him. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice laced with a mixture of anger and unease. "You know exactly what this is about, Edward," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "Your lies, your betrayal, it all ends today." As I laid out the evidence of his infidelity, his face paled, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of remorse in his eyes. But it was quickly extinguished, replaced by a familiar mask of indifference. "You think you can just waltz out on our family? There will be consequences," I warned, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. Edward's gaze flickered towards his mother, Vivian, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation. Her expression was a mixture of disappointment and stubborn loyalty, and in that moment I realized that she would never truly take my side, no matter the depths of Edward's transgressions. As the confrontation reached its crescendo, with colleagues and clients looking on in stunned silence, Edward's facade finally cracked. He lashed out, hurling accusations and insults, his carefully cultivated persona crumbling before our eyes. But I stood my ground, bolstered by the knowledge that I was fighting for something far greater than his approval or respect. I was fighting for my daughter, for our family, and for the dignity that Edward had so callously trampled upon. As we left his office, the weight of his humiliation and disgrace hanging heavy in the air, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. In the days and weeks that followed, Edward's life unraveled at a dizzying pace. His professional reputation lay in tatters, his clients and colleagues abandoning him in droves. And as for our personal life, well, there was nothing left to salvage. With a heavy heart, I made the decision to leave, taking Nora with me, and leaving Edward to face the consequences of his actions alone. It was a painful choice, but one that I knew was necessary for our healing and growth. As we packed our belongings and prepared to start anew, I couldn't help but feel a sense of bittersweet relief. The man I had once loved was gone, replaced by a stranger whose selfish actions had nearly destroyed us all. But in his wake, a newfound strength had emerged, a resilience forged in the fires of betrayal and heartbreak. "You have lost everything you took for granted, Edward," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "Your family, your home, your respect, but we will rise from the ashes, stronger and more resilient than ever before." And with those words, I turned my back on the life I had once known, ready to embrace the unknown with open arms, secure in the knowledge that the worst was behind us. The day of the confrontation dawned with a sense of foreboding, a palpable tension hanging in the air. As I prepared to face Edward, my heart raced with a mixture of anger and trepidation. This was the moment of truth, the culmination of weeks of planning and preparation. Brad arrived first, his expression grim but resolute. "Are you ready for this, Mara?" he asked, his voice low and steady. I took a deep breath, steeling my nerves. "As ready as I'll ever be. It's time to end this charade once and for all." We made our way to Edward's office, a sense of purpose propelling us forward. As we entered the building, I caught sight of my parents, Henry and Joan, their faces etched with concern and determination. "We're with you, sweetheart," my mother said, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. Edward's secretary looked up in surprise as we approached, her eyes widening at the sight of our small but formidable entourage. "Mr. Edwards is in a meeting," she began, but I cut her off with a wave of my hand. "This won't wait," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. As we burst into Edward's office, he looked up in shock, his expression quickly shifting to one of defiance. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" he demanded, his voice laced with anger and a hint of unease. "You know exactly what this is about, Edward," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "Your lies, your betrayal, it all ends today." I could see the realization dawning in his eyes as he took in the presence of Brad and my parents. His gaze flickered towards his mother, Vivian, who had remained silent, her expression a mixture of disappointment and stubborn loyalty. As I laid out the evidence of his infidelity, his face paled, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of remorse in his eyes, but it was quickly extinguished, replaced by a familiar mask of indifference. "You've humiliated us all," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "It's time you faced the consequences." Edward's composure cracked, and he lashed out, hurling accusations and insults at me, at Brad, at anyone within earshot. But his words held no power over me, not anymore. "You've lost everything, Edward," I said, my voice ringing with finality. "Your family, your home, your respect. You have no one to blame but yourself." As we turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of Edward's colleagues and clients, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust. In that moment, I knew that his carefully cultivated facade had crumbled, leaving him exposed and disgraced. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity as Edward's life unraveled at a dizzying pace. His professional reputation lay in tatters, his clients and colleagues abandoning him in droves. And as for our personal life, well, there was nothing left to salvage. With a heavy heart, I made the decision to leave, taking Nora with me and leaving Edward to face the consequences of his actions alone. It was a painful choice, but one that I knew was necessary for our healing and growth. As we packed our belongings and prepared to start anew, I couldn't help but feel a sense of bittersweet relief. The man I had once loved was gone, replaced by a stranger whose selfish actions had nearly destroyed us all. But in his wake, a newfound strength had emerged, a resilience forged in the fires of betrayal and heartbreak. "You have lost everything you took for granted, Edward," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "Your family, your home, your respect. But we will rise from the ashes, stronger and more resilient than ever before." And with those words, I turned my back on the life I had once known, ready to embrace the unknown with open arms, secure in the knowledge that the worst was behind us. In the aftermath of the confrontation, a strange calm settled over me. It was as if a weight had been lifted, a burden I had carried for far too long finally cast aside. Edward's lies and deceit no longer held any power over me, and in their place a newfound sense of clarity had emerged. As the days passed, the full extent of Edward's downfall became apparent. His colleagues and clients, once so eager to bask in his charismatic presence, now turned their backs on him, their loyalty evaporating in the face of his exposed infidelity. His professional reputation lay in tatters, his once promising career reduced to ashes. But it was the personal toll that hit the hardest. Edward's overbearing mother, Vivian, had always been a thorn in my side, her traditional values and unwavering loyalty to her son creating a constant strain on our relationship. Yet even she could not ignore the weight of his transgressions, her disappointment and disapproval palpable. "You have disgraced our family, Edward," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "How could you throw it all away for a fleeting affair?" Edward, ever the master of deflection, tried to shift the blame, to paint himself as the victim of circumstance, but his excuses rang hollow, his once charming words falling on deaf ears. As for Brad, his allegiance had shifted firmly to our side, his loyalty to his brother eclipsed by a sense of moral outrage. "You've lost everything, Edward," he said, his voice laced with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Your family, your home, your respect, and you have no one to blame but yourself." In the midst of this turmoil, my focus remained steadfastly on Nora. She had already endured so much, her innocence shattered by her father's selfish actions. It was my duty, my sacred responsibility, to shield her from further harm, to create a safe haven where she could heal and grow. With the support of my parents, Joan and Henry, I made the decision to leave our family home, taking Nora with me and leaving Edward to face the consequences of his actions alone. It was a painful choice, one that tore at the very fabric of the life we had once shared, but it was necessary for our survival. As we packed our belongings, I couldn't help but feel a sense of bittersweet relief. The man I had once loved, the one who had promised to cherish and protect us, was gone, replaced by a stranger whose selfish actions had nearly destroyed us all. But in his wake, a newfound strength had emerged, a resilience forged in the fires of betrayal and heartbreak. "You have lost everything you took for granted, Edward," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "Your family, your home, your respect, but we will rise from the ashes stronger and more resilient than ever before." And with those words, I turned my back on the life I had once known, ready to embrace the unknown with open arms, secure in the knowledge that the worst was behind us. In the weeks and months that followed, Nora and I settled into a new rhythm, a simpler life, far removed from the toxicity of Edward's influence. My parents welcomed us with open arms, their farm becoming a sanctuary where we could heal and find solace in the embrace of unconditional love. It wasn't easy, of course. There were moments when the pain of Edward's betrayal threatened to consume me, when the memories of our once happy family would come crashing down like a tidal wave. But in those moments, I would look at Nora, her resilience and strength a constant reminder of why I had chosen this path. Slowly but surely, the wounds began to heal, and a newfound sense of purpose took root within me. I was no longer defined by my role as Edward's wife, but rather by my own strength and determination. I was a mother, a daughter, a woman who had faced adversity head-on and emerged victorious. As time passed, Nora and I found solace in the simple pleasures of our new life. Tending to the gardens, exploring the rolling hills and meadows that surrounded us, and forging new connections within the close-knit community that had welcomed us with open arms. And in those moments of peace and tranquility, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us here. For it was in the depths of our darkest hour that we had discovered the true meaning of resilience, the unbreakable bond that held our family together, even in the face of unimaginable betrayal. The first few weeks after leaving Edward were a whirlwind of emotions. Relief, anger, sadness. They all swirled together in a dizzying vortex, threatening to overwhelm me at times. But through it all, one constant remained, the unwavering love and support of my parents, Joan and Henry. Their farm became our sanctuary, a place where Nora and I could heal and find solace in the simple rhythms of country life. Gone were the trappings of our old existence, the material possessions and societal expectations that had once weighed us down. In their place, we found a newfound freedom, a chance to rediscover ourselves and the unbreakable bonds that truly mattered. We have so much to look forward to, Nora, I said one evening as we sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the rolling hills. This is a fresh start for us, a chance to build a life on our own terms. Nora nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of hope and trepidation. I know, Mom. It's just, I miss how things used to be before Dad. Her voice trailed off, and I pulled her close, stroking her hair. I know, sweetheart, but we'll get through this together. Your father's actions don't define us, not anymore. As the weeks turned into months, a sense of peace began to settle over us. The wounds inflicted by Edward's betrayal were far from healed, but they no longer felt like gaping, festering sores. Instead, they had become scars, reminders of the pain we had endured, but also of the strength we had found within ourselves. Nora blossomed in our new environment, her natural curiosity and intelligence finding fertile ground in the simple pleasures of farm life. She took to tending the gardens with a fervor, her hands coaxing vibrant blooms and bountiful harvests from the rich soil. It was as if she was nurturing not just the plants, but her own spirit, cultivating a newfound sense of purpose and self-worth. As for me, I found solace in the quiet moments, the simple act of breathing in the crisp country air and basking in the warmth of my parents' love. Gone were the days of constantly striving to maintain a facade of perfection, of sacrificing my own needs for the sake of an illusion. In their place, I discovered a newfound appreciation for the beauty in imperfection, the strength that comes from embracing one's vulnerabilities. It wasn't always easy, of course. There were days when the weight of Edward's betrayal threatened to crush me, when the memories of our once happy family would come crashing down like a tidal wave. But in those moments, I would look to Nora, her resilience and determination, a constant reminder of why I had chosen this path. Slowly but surely, we began to forge new connections within the close-knit community that surrounded us. The neighbors, once strangers, became like extended family, offering a warm embrace and a listening ear whenever we needed it. Their kindness and acceptance were a balm for our wounded souls, a reminder that even in the darkest of times there was still light to be found. As the seasons changed and the years passed, Nora and I grew stronger, our bond forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the love and support that surrounded us. We learned to laugh again, to find joy in the simple pleasures of life, and to embrace the future with open hearts and open minds. And through it all, one truth remained constant. The strength of a mother's love knows no bounds. It was that love that had carried us through the darkest of times, that had given us the courage to rebuild our lives from the ashes of Edward's betrayal. As I watched Nora blossom into a confident, compassionate young woman, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and gratitude. For it was in our darkest hour that we had discovered the true meaning of resilience, the unbreakable bond that held our family together, even in the face of unimaginable betrayal. And as the sun set on another day, casting a warm glow over the rolling hills and meadows that had become our home, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, our spirits fortified by the love and strength that had carried us this far.